What's up, guys? Welcome to the podcast where we can listen to trans and gender non binary voices telling us their story in their voice, reminding us that each of us is not alone. Hey, everyone, welcome to another episode of Not Alone. I have with us the lovely, the ever popular Lana Patel. And Lana's been on a few different times. She has been sharing her journey um, and of self discovery, if you will. And the last time we spoke, we introduced where she was asked to leave school, and we introduced the idea of she having to go through conversion therapy, and both of which are kind of interesting, and we want to learn more and go from there. But before we continue, Lana, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Lana Patel here. Pronouns are she, her, hers. I currently am the PR and Government Affairs Liaison for Plume. Plume is a telehealth company that's for trans folks, by trans folks. And I am also the executive assistant for Jerica Kirkley, who is the co-founder and chief medical officer of Plume.
Well, thank you so much. So, Lana, last time we spoke, you were talking about being asked to leave school, and you were staying with your grandparents, is my recollection,
Mhm.
and they sort of just asked you to go. Could you talk a little bit more about that? Just sort of refresh the listeners' memory of where we were, and we'll kind of go from there into what conversion therapy looked like, and go from there.
Yeah. So I got called into the principal's office one day in November, and my grandparents were sitting in the office. My grandmother had bloodshot eyes. She'd been crying, and my grandfather was just kind of stoic. And when I sat down, they said, "We're removing you from the school. We would much rather you leave than for parents to take their kids out of school because they don't want their kids going to school with a queer." And they handed me a box, and I packed up everything that I had into that box and got in the back seat and drove off. Um, and from there, I was enrolled into their homeschooling program, and also I was enrolled in conversion therapy. So conversion therapy started, I think, about December, January of that year. That was 2002, going into 2003. Um, and I'd lost all of my credits for my freshman year of high school. So I had to complete a whole year of work in one semester. Otherwise, I would have to repeat the ninth grade. So that was kind of, what I was dealing with. My grandparents had recently converted to Christianity, and they were kind of wrapped up in Lokia Kenge. What would people think? What would they say? And so my grandfather explicitly told me that they did a lot of work to get uh, kind of like approval or get accepted into that community, and he didn't want me messing things up for them. And my grandmother was just very, she kind of resented me. There was a lot of passive aggressive tones, and I think at that moment was when I felt like a child having to take on adult energy, adult um, topics, and things like that. So yeah, that was kind of like a life changing moment for me.
So a couple of things pop out to me. So number one, they asked you to do homeschooling, and I remember, if I remember correctly, it's through the same school,
Yeah.
which I thought was kind of ridiculous. If you think that you don't want to be part of this, you want me to still pay you money,
Hmm.
but you don't want me around. Um, with the benefit of what is it called? Hindsight, look back, if you will. If this had happened today, would it be something that you would have considered suing them for,
Mm,
or was the environment just different?
I mean, modern day, right? I think that's tough. I don't think I would set foot in there modern day, but, you know, I was a child at that time, right? I'm 13 years old. I'm in ninth grade. But this was my grandparents' dream. Like, this was their hope for me after a tumultuous situation in New York, moving out of there. I think for them, this was like a way to settle me into a more grounding experience. And yeah, I don't know. That's tough. I Modern day me would never ever set foot in that place. But I don't think my grandparents would sue at that time or even modern day, because they so badly wanted to belong somewhere. And I think they finally found a community. They just converted to this religion. They just got accepted with these people. My grandparents are both immigrants. My grandfather is like one of two Indian people that I know in the whole county. My grandmother is a biracial woman from Jamaica, so it's like Afro biracial woman, and they're the only black and brown couple in the whole county. So that for them, it was like, oh, these people have accepted us. Like, we're gonna go all the way. Um, and I was kind of a threat to that safety net, that security for them. So I don't think in modern day they probably would have gone against them. Um, they probably would have felt, and I'm sure there would have been rhetoric from the church that would have insinuated that, like, it could be the devil, it could be, I don't know, Satan. Like, it's for them to go against them would be wrong, because I was the problem. And so I was the one who needed to be reprimanded, dealt with. And I think that's why conversion therapy came about. It was, well, we've tried. We've signed this child up for Bible study. They've been going to Bible study. The kids are still picking on them. We're afraid that this is going to get out of control and parents are not going to want their children going to the school because we have a queer child here. So we're going to remove you from the school. You're allowed to come, commune with us for church. We'll take your money. You can sign up for homeschooling, but also try this conversion therapy. Like, maybe what we were doing was not enough. Like, you might need something more. And I think my grandparents probably so badly wanted to just have me belong. They wanted that sense of normalcy that it in their minds, it made sense to sign me up for conversion therapy. Like, I think it was their way of saving my soul, maybe,
Yeah.
like, yeah, because I went through a baptism. It was, yeah.
So let me ask you this question again. This is not a religious philosophy class because, quite bluntly, I'm not qualified to do that. I
Hmm.
don't know if you are, but my my wh- I'm Hindu. I think I've mentioned that to you previously. So
I'm also a Hindu. Yeah.
right, um, and your grandfather was Hindu at this, well,
Hmm.
prior to this moment.
Yeah.
And Hinduism has numerous stories involving either gender queerness or transgenderism or cross dressing. There are stories involving that in the Mahabharata, if you will. So, your grandfather, I imagine, would have been exposed to those stories.
Hmm.
I'm not by any stretch arguing that Hinduism itself lands up being um, a queer paradise. I'm not sure that's true. And every religion and it was a time when this was just difficult. Um,
Hmm.
but my question for you is, for them to enter a new religion and see their granddaughter not be accepted, wouldn't that have made them go, I want to find a community? Maybe it's within that church, or maybe it's another church that's more inclusive of my granddaughter's needs, as opposed to blaming her. Now I can argue that I can see a perspective that I want to fit in, but don't you want to fit in a place where you're welcome, as opposed to where you are the odd person sticking out. They're almost doing you a favor by letting you be there. So how did as someone who's seeing in to their lives, how did they experience that? Was there any kind of religious push and pull associated with that, or was it very clearly we're in this for good, and the rest of us need to fall in line?
I think it was the latter. I think for my grandparents, it was they've given themselves over to the church. They've given themselves to Christianity, right? And I was the problem. There's a quote that my grandparents, well, my grandmother mainly would say, but at this point, we were going to church 3 times a week. We went to church Sunday morning, Sunday evening, and Wednesday evening, I believe. We did Bible study every evening at 7. I mean, I could quote the Bible. I've read the whole thing back and forth numerous times. We read Psalms and Proverbs every day. We read the New Testament, the Old Testament, Genesis and Revelations. I know all the stories. And there's a quote, I think the wages of sin is death. And so, there was rhetoric in the Bible that spoke to Sodom and Gomorrah, effeminate people. And, they always kind of quote Sodom and Gomorrah whenever they speak to homosexuality. And this whole idea of, Lot was like the only righteous man in that place. And he went there with his wife and family. And, he was the only one who made it out because his wife turned back and turned into a pillar of salt when the Lord said, to leave. And the story was, Lot was sent there to find one righteous person, and everyone was homosexual, pretty much. That's the way that they kind of explain the story. Like even the angels, were gay. And because of that, God had to destroy the city of Sodom and Gomorrah. It was like a unholy, right, place. And I think they were fed that rhetoric that like this is that this is wrong. And for me, I think that they felt as though I being I was I think in their head it was this idea of like, we want to save you. We don't want you to go to hell.
Yeah.
So the church is saying this, like, we're not going to find a place that's going to be accepting, because that's saying that we're accepting the sin. And I think Christianity was teaching them, at least at that point, was like, hate the sin, love the sinner.
Right.
But they weren't in a place where they were going to go to an affirming, like an LGBTQ affirming space, because it's like, that's a sin. So
Right.
you need to conform, you need to get saved, you need to repent, you need to walk away from those feelings, and accept the Lord in your life so that you can commune with these other people. So yeah, I think in their head it was, we're trying to save you.
Yeah.
So we're not gonna go find another space. Like, this is our space. This is our home. This is our family community. And as our loved one, our flesh and blood, like, we want you to be a part of this community. And there's also like this whole idea of like Jesus kind of washing us over, like Jesus bled for us so that he died on the cross so that we don't have to have a physical death to enter the kingdom of God, you know?
Right.
Um, yeah.
I kind of think it's interesting because recent proclamations from the Pope came out and said homosexuality is not a sin. If I read that properly, maybe I misread or misheard, but I thought that that was interesting with coming directly from the Pope.
Mhm.
But I guess religion, like everything else, evolves, and the last 15 years have been a ton of evolution for everything, I guess. But you talked a little bit about the church, that church, saying maybe you need additional help, and that would be
Mhm.
conversion therapy. All I have heard about conversion therapy is it's wrong or it's right. I have no idea what happens in there. Um, for those people, and now I believe it's illegal in many places to actually
Mhm.
do conversion
For
therapy.
under 18.
Right, right. Okay.
Yeah.
So I guess my question for you is you've actually been through it. So what was that experience like? How do you like talk me through how they prepare you for the idea of it, how you responded to it, and go in through like what were your day-to-day experiences like?
Yeah, I don't remember how many sessions it was necessarily, but I remember it being like at least the majority of the second semester where I was doing homeschooling. And I think every Thursday we would go, and it was like an hour or two.
Oh, so
And
it's not a camp.
oh, no, no, no.
Okay.
I mean, for me, I don't know for
Sure.
others,
Sure.
but yeah, it was my grandparents and I, the three of us would go. And there was it was like a therapist, but also like a religious leader or pastor or something. I don't know, but it took place in another church.
Sure.
So this was in Lakeland, and Lakeland was the major city of Polk County. And
Mhm.
so we would go there, and I would sit with him. And I think we had sessions with like the three of us together, and then there were sessions with just he and I. Um, and it was just kind of talking about like how important the Bible is, what it means to be a boy, a man. Um,
And what did
except
they say it means?
I think it was kind of all biblically based,
Okay.
and it there was a time where they set up a baptism for me, so I had to get saved. I'm thinking back on it, and I'm like, I feel like I've been saved so many times. I've had to like go through that whole prayer and
Right.
whatever, but yeah, I had an actual baptism. They dunked me in the water, the whole 9 yards. But it was I just remember like kind of detesting this man. I He had this tick about him, the things that he would say, the do that was just really unnerving and very uncomfortable. And then I found out my mother actually was the one who was paying for me to go to conversion therapy. And at that point, I just had a lot going on because I felt like I'd given up so much to move to Florida, and I had hopes that I would move there and start my life over and things would be better, but they felt like a continuum of the mess that I was experiencing in New York, but it was unfortunate and it was frustrating because I gave up my freedom. I'm a New York kid, right? I'm from the city. I'm used to being able to walk around anywhere. I'm used to being able to take the bus. There's dollar vans. There's like I have the world at my fingertip. And now I live in rural Florida in a very conservative space where I can walk for an hour and still not make it to my school. Like, I live in the middle of nowhere and I'm reliant on cars. Like, there's no transportation. I don't have friends. This is in the dial up era. You know, you can either use the phone or use the computer. You can't do both. You know,
Yeah.
for me to call to New York is long distance. So I couldn't keep up with my friends. You know, I didn't have money for calling cards. So all of the relationships that I had were just dissolving. The only thing I really had was snail mail. I didn't have a job, so I can't really afford stamps. So it was very isolating. And then I just got withdrawn from the school. I have no friends. And like the kids that I did speak to are at the church, but they isolate me and they treat me like I have leprosy.
Right.
The only people I really connect with are my cousins whenever they come for the holidays. But other than that, it's just my grandparents and I. There were 3 houses in the neighborhood. So it was just a lot of trauma in that time. And I remember packing up my things into this because I had 2 suitcases that I took when I moved to Florida. And I remember when I got withdrawn from the school, I packed everything up and I said, I'm moving back to New York. And my mother made the executive decision to say, no, you're not. You're staying in Florida. And so my home was no longer my home. And it was like this weird paradigm of not knowing where I belonged and like what my life was anymore. Like I felt like my life didn't belong to me, that I was a puppet on strings, that everyone was able to manipulate me in some way or form. I didn't have a voice, I didn't have agency. And this was just another thing. Like I'm a tool for conversion therapy. I'm a tool for um I don't know, the sanction and the saviorism that is Christianity. So, yeah, I think that was like a very tough time for me because I did not enjoy going to see this therapist, this religious leader, going through the conversion therapy. Um, it obviously didn't work. My mother's money was wasted. Full blown woman, still like men, and yeah, it just was a very traumatic time for me.
So, how did you mentioned the only people you could connect with at that time were your cousins? How did they react and respond to you?
My cousins were always, I don't know, they were cool, but my family's also, I mean, you know, Desi folks, immigrant folk, um, like it was twofold because they act one way to your face and then you hear things behind your back. So to my face, my cousins were cool, but then I would hear stuff about me behind my back.
Like
So
what?
it was like twofold. It was like they'd be accepting, they'd be cool. Like I was the cousin who was very much into skincare and makeup and hair. And I can tell you anything. I'm like, use this product. You- Like I helped my cousin pick out her first beauty powder. I'm like, this is your color. You should do this. You should do that. Like, and they appreciated me, my knowledge, my talents, right? But then there was also like this idea of like, this is how they are. Like they would joke or make fun of me. Like I loved long nails. I always was a feminine person and I'd grow my nails out. And then my aunt, like she'd be cool with me, but then I'd hear her talking, stuff about me and saying like, oh, like why do you have your nails long? And this is before transition. So, why are their nails long? Like, I wouldn't do that. Or like I was growing my hair out and it was like, "Oh, yeah, oh, yeah, your hair looks good." But then turn around and be like, kinda egging my grandmother on, "Oh, wow, their hair is long." Like, "Well, oh, you let that happen?" So, yeah, it was just a lot of two-face. And then, when I started my transition, it was like, "Oh, yeah, they were cool with me at first," but then they would go back and say, "Oh, you're gonna need a lot of money for surgeries. You look very masculine." My grandfather was like, "I'm gonna make an ugly girl." my cousins would be cool to me, like with me, and then we'd hang out at their place and stuff. And then they would want to go out at night, and then they would make up excuses why I can't come. Like, oh, you don't have an ID. Like, you need to get a fake ID because everything's 21 and up, and you're not 21, so you can't come out. And yeah, it was a lot of like two-face stuff happening. Yeah,
Did you think that you were more open-minded than them?
for sure. I mean, I was from New York, right? These are cousins that lived in Miami, so obviously Miami's like the hub of um, liberal Florida.
Sure.
They grew up around more liberal type of spaces. They're from Miami. I had cousins from other places too, but the ones that I mainly saw and interacted with were my cousins from Miami. But I think me being a New Yorker and then also identifying as someone in the community made me a lot more open-minded than them. And I was the first person in my family who identified as LGBT.
Right.
Uh, and I think that was like new for a lot of people. It was just like, what what is this? Like, why are you like this? Yeah, so I felt like I was accepted. Like people loved my personality and who I was as a person, but I was also tolerated. It was like, okay, like, I'm the fun cousin, I'm the crazy cousin, I'm the knowledgeable cousin, you know, I was a good time, but at the same time, it was like, this is the queer cousin at this, like, it was twofold.
Um, it's an interesting dichotomy, and I think about what that experience was like growing up, and we it was a difficult time and a different time. So it's sort of an interesting perspective to look back. So I appreciate you sharing so much. So you're now um in a so you've now finished school. You homeschooled. You graduated. What does that preview? Because we're out of time, so I want you to preview what our next conversation is going to look like. So where were you? Where did you go to college? How did that process begin? Because you now graduated. What does
Yeah.
that actually look like?
Well, I don't know if I want to jump that far.
Okay. Cool.
The next conversation will probably start the last year of high school because that's when things started
Oh.
to shift.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. I didn't. I
So,
thought this was the last year of high school. I'm sorry. I
oh no,
misunderstood.
this is freshman year of high school. I just
Ah,
started. So I
okay.
ended up homeschooling for 3 years.
Okay.
So I had to cram my full freshman year into one semester. And then I did sophomore and junior year homeschooling. And then for senior year, I went to an actual school. I went
Oh,
to public
okay.
school.
Okay.
Yeah.
Still in Florida.
Still in Florida.
Okay. Oh, that's a really fun place to get into because you go from homeschooling because now you've got the not only the layer of being queer, but transitioning out of homeschooling into public schooling and
Mhm.
all of those different intersections of identities coming together. Because you're becoming a I don't want to say fuller person, but this idea of becoming who you are as we
Mhm.
all grow. So I think that'll be a really fun conversation to have. So Lana, before we go, how can people reach you if they have questions?
Yeah. Please feel free to find me. I'm on the webs, Lana Patel. I need to work on a website, so that's something this year. I was in the process of a few years ago, and then like last year, I felt like I was moving towards it, but this year I need to solidify my website, so folks can just find me there. Um, yeah, and anything plume related, you can find me uh, through Plume. But anything outside of Plume, Lana Patel. Uh, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you again for coming on, Lana.
Yeah, thank you for having me.